Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. I am Scott Bevan coming to you live from Glasgow. I am joined today in the studio by Brian Liddy. Hello, Brian.
Hello, Scott.
Socially distanced, but you are here. We are going to crack on with the coronavirus update today. As of 2 pm today, a total of 2,365,322 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and UK government regional testing centres since the start of the pandemic. Of these, 2,044,120 have been confirmed negative. 321,202 have tested positive. There are 2,636 new cases of COVID-19 confirmed by a test. Although not everyone with the virus will display symptoms, and not all those with symptoms will be tested. There are 11 new reported deaths of people who have tested positive. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus COVID-19 infection now stands at 7,772. This number only includes those who have died having received a positive test for the virus in the previous 28 days. Of the people who have tested positive, 515 were in hospital last night, 46 of whom were in intensive care. As of 8 am this morning, 3,948,446 people had received their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccination, and 2,914,904 had received their second dose. The latest UK daily figures show 128,530 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 49 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings, not just hospitals. The NRS update now, as of the 30th of June, 10,220 deaths have been registered in Scotland, where the novel coronavirus, COVID-19, was mentioned on the death certificate, according to statistics published by the National Records of Scotland today. In the week from the 5th of July to the 11th of July 2021, 30 deaths were registered that mentioned COVID-19 on the death certificate, an increase of 8 deaths from the previous week. There were 5 deaths in the city of Edinburgh, 4 in both Glasgow City and South Lanarkshire. 14 other council areas also recorded deaths involving COVID-19 last week. Over the course of the pandemic, Glasgow City, Renfrewshire, West Dunbartonshire and North Lanarkshire have had the highest COVID-related death rates, with people in large urban areas being 3.7 times as likely to die with COVID as those in remote rural areas after adjusting for age. Our top story this evening then, UK government has introduced proposals to end prosecutions relating to the Northern Ireland Troubles before 1998. All 5 major parties in Northern Ireland, as well as the government in Ireland, have condemned the move to end prosecutions of historic crimes related to the Troubles. DUP leader Sir Geoffrey Donaldson said that the proposals for an effective amnesty for Troubles-related crimes are totally unacceptable, while Sinn Féin President Mary Lou MacDonald said that the introduction of an amnesty for British soldiers who went into the streets and gunned down innocent civilians in Derry, Ballymurphy and beyond is an insult to victims and their families. Boris Johnson was bullish in his defence of the plans at Prime Minister's questions today, claiming that they are measured and balanced and that it was time to draw a line under the Troubles in Northern Ireland. The legislation also brings an end to legacy inquests and civil actions. Currently, there are around 36 inquests relating to the Troubles due to be heard. Many of these relate to killings by the army and police. Alongside this, there are more than 1,000 civil claims lodged against the Ministry of Defence and other state agencies. Families from all sides of those killed in the conflict have condemned the government's plans. Mark Thompson, whose brother Peter was shot dead by British soldiers in Belfast in 1990, said, "We're seeing de facto impunity. This is a government that doesn't care a jot for human rights and the rule of law." 4 months following the peace agreement, the Omagh bombings took place, ending the lives of 29 people. Cases related to this attack are still able to be heard under the new rules. Claire Monteith, who lost her 16-year-old brother Alan in the atrocity, said that the government's plan created 2 tiers of victims, either side of the 10th of April 1998. She said, "It's a knife in the heart of all of us. Victims and survivors are exhausted trying to get truth and justice. To date, 3,000 killings related to the conflict remain unsolved." Brian, this is something that we saw on the cards for a while, wasn't it? The government did mention a while back that they would think about doing this, but it seems to me that if there is sufficient evidence to try someone and convict someone, then for the government to step in and say we're going to end all these prosecutions, essentially people are just going to get away with it, aren't they?
Yes, I think that really it is all about justice, justice for people who've lost loved ones on both sides of the divide. And I think what the government has decided its approach is going to be is not going to deliver justice. It's a complicated situation, but what can I say? I mean, it's been rejected by all the political parties in Northern Ireland. It's been rejected by all the victim support groups for the families. It's been rejected by the Irish government. It's been rejected by Amnesty International. I believe it's also even been rejected by the Labour Party with Keir Starmer's comments. And I just can't understand. Basically, I think, to me, it seems like it's a whitewash is underway. That's what we're witnessing.
Yeah. Are the Conservatives then undoing a lot of the work that was done in the 90s and the peace process started, in fact, under a Conservative government and completed by Labour? Are they effectively undoing a lot of this by deciding that no more prosecutions will be heard when there's still so many cases that haven't been?
Yes, they're taking the easy way out, and I think they're also covering their own backs. Boris Johnson said that at PMQs today, as you said in your intro, that it was time to draw a line under the past. But I think really what he really is talking about doing is sweeping everything under the carpet. The families who lost loved ones, I mean, it was over 40 years ago, as Brandon Lewis said in his statement. It was a long time ago, but I don't think the families that did lose loved ones, and that's not their concern. They don't want the government's also saying that instead of there being correct legal investigations by the authorities and the police forces, they're just going to replace it with things like oral history opportunities where people can talk about what's happened to them and their families and how they think and feel about that. Really, I wouldn't even, that's similar to the approach that was taken in South Africa when apartheid came to an end. And I could certainly understand the reason for that. And you can kind of see, well, maybe there is maybe it might work in Northern Ireland, but ultimately I just do not trust Westminster to do it properly. Basically, they're just trying to distract everybody's attention and not give proper resolution.
Yeah, Boris Johnson in his statements in Westminster said that a lot of these men are now in their 70s and 80s and essentially that they should be left alone. But of course it's both sides, isn't it? It's not just those who he was saying were service personnel who were at the mercy of what he called vexatious prosecutions. And it's both sides though, isn't it? So it's those who were involved in bombings as well for the IRA, so they won't be prosecuted either. So this is going to just increase tensions, is it not?
I hope not, but there's a good chance that it will. Again, this is just piling more pressure on top of the situation on Northern Ireland and on top of what's already been caused by Brexit and the border down the Irish Sea. So I'm not going to start talking about that because it's not what we're talking about tonight, but it's definitely already a very fragile or tense situation. Trying to get back to what you said about both, it's true, both sides were guilty. But that doesn't mean, I think, what I think is happening is that Westminster, the Tory government, the Tory administration is saying, I think they have a lot to hide and they're willing to just write everything off as if, it was a game of poker. They'll just cut their losses. They'll let the other side get away with the crimes that they were guilty of, but the bonus is that they will not have to be held to account to the things that the British government have done wrong, previous British governments. So I think they're just, as I said, they're just sweeping everything under the carpet and hoping that it'll go away.
Yeah, the lady Claire Monteith earlier, who lost her brother, said that that's essentially creating a two-tier system of victims: those who were killed before the peace process and those who were killed after it. There's also a trial that's ongoing just now, or in fact has just been dismissed, the trial of Soldier F, where there was an appeal against that trial because they said there wasn't sufficient evidence from what was gathered at the time, and that has been appealed against. But this will now not be heard. The appeal won't be heard because it took place before that time. So there's going to be a number of sort of inconsistencies around this, is there not?
Yes, but ultimately it's more important that justice is seen to be done. And even if they may decide that once the facts have been established and we know who is guilty of what, people may well have been long dead by the time we get to that stage down the line. But I just think it's incredible that the government can just say, you know, we're just not going to try and find out exactly what happened. It may well take a long time, but again, I think the families would be willing to wait. And even if it does take generations or more than this generation, again, I think it's a worthwhile pursuit. The government really is just obfuscating, I think, and again, just they know that they can just ignore this and they hope it will go away, but hopefully it won't. With people like Amnesty International, hopefully they'll continue to highlight this.
Should there be any statute of limitations, do you think, on these prosecutions?
Well, I'm not a lawyer or a politician, but I think I would just recommend that they carry out the investigations, find out what happened, and then let's think about how the families and the descendants feel about it, and what public opinion might be. I don't want to talk about the court of public opinion. I'm realising that that's what it sounds like, but we just don't. There's just too many facts that we don't know, that haven't come to light yet, and I think we just need to carry on with the investigations, the police investigations. Yes, there are thousands of them, and yes, it may well take decades, but I don't think there should be statutes of limitation. I think they should carry on with the rules that are in place at the moment, and try and do the right thing.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Brian. The EU has launched its big climate plan for our children and grandchildren, it says. The proposal aims to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 55% from 1990 levels by 2030. The plan will affect transport, manufacturing, trade and consumers. This will mean rising costs of emitting carbon for heating, transport and manufacturing, taxing high-carbon aviation fuel and shipping fuel that have not been taxed before, and charging importers at the borders for the carbon emitted in making products such as cement, steel and aluminium abroad. The plans will consign the internal combustion engine to the annals of history. The EU climate policy chief Frans Timmermans said that the measures are hard but necessary, saying, "If we renounce our obligation to help humanity live within its planetary boundaries, we would fail not just ourselves, but we would fail our children and grandchildren." Painting a picture of a dystopian future, he said that the price of failure was that the next generations would be fighting wars over water and food. Big business organisations such as the German Association of Chambers of Industry and Commerce are already claiming that compensation will be required for companies to meet the new climate targets. But climate activists have been quick to highlight what they see as a lack of ambition on the part of the EU due to an attempt to appease business leaders. EU Director for Greenpeace, Jorgo Riss, said in a statement that celebrating these policies is like a high jumper claiming a medal for running in under the bar. This whole package is based on a target that is too low, doesn't stand up to science, and won't stop the destruction of our planet's life support systems. The EU hopes that other nations and trading blocs, such as the US and China, will follow their lead at the COP26 talks here in Glasgow in November. COP26 is going to be really the last chance, isn't it, for meaningful action to be taken on the climate crisis.
It would appear so. In all of the press releases about this today, people have been talking about how this is the last. This decade is the last decade that we have to fix this problem and to try and secure the planet for future generations. There is something in the last quote that you said there that kind of rings true, that the EU shouldn't be so celebratory at the moment, and certainly that's true. All of these proposals have yet to be put in place, but at the same time, I would hazard to suggest that at least the EU, they seem to have an idea of what the right thing to do is, what direction we should be going in. And I would compare and contrast that with what I think will be the future approach with Westminster in a post-Brexit world. I think the EU will be trying to aim for the long term, and I think that Britain, once it leaves the EU, now that we've left the EU, we will just be chasing trade deals and breaking any of these conditions that the EU are setting out about how we should not use oil, for example, or
yeah. I mean, the approach seems to be to raise taxes and make it harder for these companies to do the things that are damaging the planet. So it's a way of encouraging companies, if you like, to do the better thing. But is that going to be enough? I mean, climate activists are already pointing out that this is perhaps not the approach that they should be taking, because as well, perhaps it's going to be passed on to consumers. Rather than, instead of the companies just deciding we're going to stop doing this, they're going to pass these prices on to consumers, perhaps. And if that's the case, is this going to really do anything at all?
You're right, there is bound to be some kind of impact on energy bills. It seems are probably going to have to go up, which would increase the chance of energy poverty. I mean, we've already got austerity. How long did we have to suffer austerity under the previous administrations? There's talk about how if there are food shortages and water shortages and high global temperatures, then there's going to be public protests. Talk of wars over water and food, and these may well all turn out to be true. But I think at least the EU, they're making the right noises, but yes, they need to start to put things into practice and make some palpable progress. COP26 hopefully will contribute towards that move, but again, I just cannot see anybody that's going to attend COP26 trusting Boris Johnson and his administration. Whatever they sign up to, I'm sure will be it'll be seen for what it is.
Well, the eyes of the world are going to be on Glasgow in November for COP26. And of course, Scotland doesn't really have its own representation at that, or at least not an independent one. So anything that's coming out of Scotland will be the UK position. Do you think that undermines Scotland and the Scottish position in any way?
Yes, I'm really worried about that, actually, that Westminster and Boris Johnson and will take COP26 as a chance to just perform bombastic and jingoistic flag waving and proclaim how well we're doing in terms of renewable energies and the like, when really, as far as I can tell, when I look at the figures, I would say that Scotland is shouldering most of that. We are carrying the weight when it comes to tree planting, wind energy, tidal energy is experimental at the moment, but looks like it's going to be the one of the strongest things that we have. And we need to find, the SNP or the Scottish Government need to find a way to make sure that they are represented properly at COP26, and that any of the achievements that have been achieved by the Scottish Government get attributed to the Scottish Government and don't just get swallowed up into the UK figures. We are building more affordable houses. Some would say we're perhaps going to be improving infrastructure, which is going to lead to more car usage. But certainly tree planting is on the up in Scotland, and yeah, I think it's like we've definitely got to make a stand at COP26.
People realise that things need to change, and I think that the big players, America and China, etc., Russia, realise that they're going to need to do something. But often what happens at these conferences in the past is they commit to these targets and then they don't follow through, because America goes, well, if China aren't doing it, we're not going to do it. And China goes, well, if India aren't doing it, then we're not going to do it. What is it going to take to get everyone to agree that there is going to have to be a substantial change over the next decade?
I don't know, but I did read a comment recently. I think it might even have just been a headline. I didn't get to delve into it, but someone had proposed that climate change should be treated the same way that COVID was treated recently, where individual countries had to do their own thing because the COVID situation for the pandemic was particular to their country, but everybody more or less got behind the general the need to do what was right. Everybody seemed to acknowledge that the pandemic was a real thing, and countries basically closed down and closed their borders, and they really, and I think that's right. I mean, I think that headline was right. I think that when it comes to climate change, we need to start taking drastic measures now. COP26 hopefully could be the start of that, but yeah, there will be sceptics, understandably, but hopefully this will be it. Something definitely has to be done. I mean, just the warm weather we're having at the moment, people say that with climate change, Scottish climate is going to get wetter and water is going to be the thing that wars are going to be fought over. But again, it looks, according to recent predictions, it seems that Scotland's summers are going to get warmer and drier, and it's our winters that are going to get wetter. And the other day there, I was walking across one of the pedestrian bridges in the Clyde, and I could see the bottom of the Clyde. And I've never had that before in my life. It's not as deep even as you might think it was going to be. So even in this summer here in Scotland, I think it's affecting water reserves and water levels. So we've got to act now. There's no time to waste, and we've got to do something big.
Absolutely agreed. Okay, so moving on to our next story then. New research from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation shows that if the Chancellor's plans to cut universal credit go ahead, then millions will be left without the income needed to afford the minimum living standard, and Scottish child payments will be undermined. As food bank usage, debt and poverty rise to record levels after a decade of Tory austerity cuts, a Tory hard Brexit and a global health pandemic, the SNP has urged the UK government to U-turn on this decision to prevent millions more from falling into further hardship and destitution. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation has today revealed that the planned £20 a week cut to universal credit could leave out-of-work families with children receiving barely half of the income the public believes is required to achieve an acceptable standard of living, while adults without children will receive around a third. The upcoming Tory cuts would reduce the value of out-of-work benefits to their lowest recorded levels relative to what the public thinks is an acceptable income, as well as cancel out the impact of the Scottish Government's plans to double the Scottish child payment. The report comes just 2 days after a significant intervention by the Northern Research Group, which consists of around 50 Tory MPs, who echoed the SNP's call for the UK Government to make the universal credit £20 uplift permanent, saying it has been a lifesaver for families and that doing so would hamper the UK's economic recovery. There's a lot to unpack there in that, isn't there? If we're looking at the cost of living has risen quite steeply over the past few years. and people's wages haven't, and benefits certainly haven't. So after this pandemic, why would the government then decide that they are going to ensure that payments don't go up?
That's a good question. When you say the government, you mean Westminster?
The Westminster government.
Yes. Again, what can I say? I think it's just a typical Tory response to an important problem, poverty and the like. It's absolutely true that inflation is higher this year now. It's just gone up. It's the highest that it's been for many years, and it's going. I'm sure it's not going to stop where it is now. Low pay does seem to be the norm. 0 hours contracts seem to be the norm. People are having to pay high rents, and it's. I just think it's incredible that we're talking about poverty from people who are in work, and that the universal credit is a credit for people that are out there, and these were core workers, frontline workers, when we were going through lockdowns and the like. It just seems brutally unfair that the Tory government should go ahead with these cuts, and as for the Northern Research Group, the 50 Tory MPs who seem to recently have echoed the SNP's policy statements, which the SNP have been saying this for a while now. I think they'll soon find that they've been conned, but we knew that was going to happen. I don't know what more I can say, really.
Well, there are one-bedroom flats, for example, going for $500,000 in places in the south of England, and that's one-bedroom flats. Not very large ones at that. And they're trying to, of course, encourage people to buy these. But who has that kind of money now?
Rich Tory donors, corporate heads of corporate conglomerates. They have that kind of money. Russian oligarchs, I suppose. The figures are staggering. I mean, not just in terms of how much it actually costs to keep a body and soul together these days, but to get back to the children and that these reports have been about, it's something like 2,000 children across Scotland that are going to be suffering because of these measures. 1 in 5 children in the whole of the UK are going to be living in poverty, according to the TUC. Once again, it seems that because of what's decided and brought into practice in Westminster, the Scottish Government has to any gains that the Scottish Government has made are simply wiped out. They're cancelled, and there are calls to mitigate it in Scotland, when really that money could be spent somewhere else if we were independent and if we could do what we wanted and run the country the way that, get a fair and honest and respectful country that we want. So again, to me, independence is the answer. It's clear.
Okay, what are the Scottish Conservatives saying about this?
Again, a good question. Well, they've failed to make they brought in the £20 increase to universal credit during the lockdowns and the pandemic. We're not out of the pandemic yet. Figures of the Delta variant are rising, and yet, despite people like the Northern Research Group and the SNP asking the government to make that £20 increase permanent, they're just going to withdraw that. Rishi Sunak has decided that he would rather open up business than try to reduce poverty in families and working families. The SNP, they want to keep, I think they are going to make the £20 COVID payment permanent, but that'll be cancelled by Westminster policies. They also want to abolish the 2-child cap, which again, Westminster is going to carry on regardless. I don't know what.
Picking up on what you said about the TUC, a new report from the TUC has found that more than 1 million children in the UK from families working on the front line are living in poverty. They've also confirmed The low pay, insecure hours, rising house prices, and the removal of this, £20 a week universal credit uplift were some of the key reasons for in-work poverty among key workers. So these are the people that the government have said we should all be respecting, we should all be clapping. They've saved us during the pandemic, and these are the people being hit hardest. How do they justify that?
They can't justify it, but they have an 80-seat majority. They have the new 50 MPs that were the red wall in the north. I suppose they just feel that they're invincible at the moment. I think this is going to be the third time that I've said this, and I haven't even appeared on this show very often, but I can't help thinking about those pictures of people like Mundell, when he was Secretary of State for Scotland, turning up at the opening of new food banks in his constituency for a photo opportunity. And the implication was, and Jacob Rees-Mogg saying that food banks were a good thing because it showed how generous the British people were. Talking as if food banks are an amenity, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, food banks are not an amenity, they're a disgrace, and they just should be abolished. There should be no need for them at all.
Yeah, I mean, the Shadow Fair Work and Employment spokesperson Chris Stephen, MP, said today that the report concludes that the Tory government are failing millions of families across the United Kingdom. The SNP has long called on a 20-week universal credit uplift to be made permanent and to abolish the two-child cap, which, as of today's report concludes, would play a crucial role in removing tens of thousands of children from poverty. Do you think that is the road that they should be going down?
Should they be going down maintaining the two-child cap? No. It's just rank hypocrisy. Again, just going back to, as you mentioned earlier, people would go out onto their doorsteps and bang pots and pans and clap for the NHS, as did Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak. They stood outside the front door of number 10 Downing Street, and so that TV cameras could film them doing the same thing. And then they turn around and maintain policies that are going to keep key workers, key working families, the children in those families under the poverty line. It's disgraceful in this day and age.
Our next story then. Ian Blackford calls out Boris Johnson's racism at PMQs. Ian Blackford MP has called out the Prime Minister for his own racist comments, repeating the powerful statement by footballer Tyrone Mings, who said, "This government doesn't get to stoke the fires of racism and then pretend to be disgusted by it when it happens." Mr Blackford asked the Prime Minister what sanctions he thinks would be appropriate for someone who publishes racist content, such as describing Africans as flag-waving pickaninnies with watermelon smiles, as previously written by Boris Johnson in a newspaper article. Mr Blackford also criticised the UK government's own report on racism, the Sewell report, which was published in March, and said that there was no systemic problem in the UK. The SNP Westminster leader congratulated the England football team for an incredible achievement, but said that the tragedy of the tournament was the undercurrent of racism, and said it falls on all of us to face it down and call it out. This is something that has gripped the nation, both north and south of the border, since the final the other night. And the tragic thing is that so many who watched that final, when they saw the penalty takers who didn't score and the penalty takers who did score, called it out right away, didn't they? And said that this is going to happen. Please don't let it. And of course, it did. Is this something that we suffer from as much in Scotland as they do in England, racism in football?
Probably yes. I would say racism probably is. Well, no, I'll say it. Racism is a problem in Scotland, absolutely. But for me, I mean, to go back to, I mean, I was watching Prime Minister's PMQs today when Ian Blackford stood up, and as he started his question, I began to switch off because I thought, oh, this is not going to be this isn't going to be about Scotland. This question, this Blackford's question, I thought was just going to be about something of no consequence. But by the time he finished his question, I was cheering the rafters. For him to fair and square to accuse Boris Johnson of racism. It was wonderful to behold, and again, Johnson's reply, where he said the comments were simply taken out of context. Again, I couldn't do anything else but agree with Ian Blackford's response to that, which was no contrition and no apology yet again. And then if you think about the Sewell report, which said that there was no systemic racism in the UK, and that is the UK, not just England, and yet you think about Windrush and the tragedy at Grenfell and Theresa May's toxic environment for refugees, which is being enhanced and carried on by Priti Patel. It's clear that there is systemic racism in the UK. And then if you contrast that with the recent events in Kenmure Street, where a community came out and stood up and stood together and to stand against the government and their policies and the toxic environment for refugees, then okay, there is racism in Scotland, but we've had the Glasgow Girls, we've had Kenmure Street, so hopefully we could do the right thing and abolish racism if we didn't have to contend with policies that were coming from Westminster.
Has a sitting Prime Minister ever been openly accused of racism in Parliament by another MP before?
Not that I'm aware of, and yet it's this thing where you see it often where someone does accuse usually a Tory MP of being a liar, they've used that word, and the Speaker will say, we can't say that. And I noticed that Keir Starmer and probably his predecessor started to say, that's simply not true at PMQs. And that goes unchallenged. And that just makes me, again, just think of rank hypocrisy. The fact that you can say directly to a Prime Minister or a minister in the Cabinet that when they've stated something in the House and the opposition can say, that is not true, then they're calling you a liar. So why not just speak it like it is, call a spade a spade? Boris Johnson is a racist. Priti Patel, I found out today, her father was a candidate for UKIP recently, unsuccessful, I believe. But so again, it runs in families and runs in families of Tory voters and right-wing candidates.
Rees-Mogg's sister was a Brexit candidate.
Yes.
She was a Brexit MEP, I think she was elected for a short time. Marcus Rashford's mural was defaced by racist and offensive language, but the community came out and put up post-it notes and letters and stickers, in support of him, and people are now saying that should be left there. That should be sort of left on the mural to Marcus Rashford for what he did for starving children, basically. Do you think that will happen?
The mural, yes, I'm sure the mural will stay there. Apparently, when it was vandalised and defaced, that's now been repainted, and there's no sign that's been erased and obliterated. And it would be good to think that racism in this country, internationally, could be obliterated and eliminated. I know that what we're talking about is racism, but you did mention Rashford and free school meals. And again, it just goes to show that how things are done differently in Scotland and could be so much better in Scotland. Because when Rashford shamed the Tory government into continuing to pay for children's school meals during the summer holidays recently, during the time of lockdown and pandemic, this was something that the SNP had already agreed that they would do. And they did, without any need for any footballer to shame them publicly and disgrace them in that way. So again, it just shows things could be done so much differently here if things were different.
Our next story then. Sian Berry has quit as the English and Welsh Green Party leader. Miss Berry said, "I have been considering my position as co-leader since the decision was made to announce our new front bench spokespeople." In a scathing resignation letter, the Green leader expressed the view that she could no longer make the claim that the English and Welsh Green Party fully backed trans rights, following the party's choice of front bench representatives. The news follows the recent resignation of fellow co-leader Jonathan Bartley, who was first elected leader 5 years ago on a joint ticket alongside the Greens' only MP in Westminster, Carolyn Lucas. While Miss Berry did not name names, there has been criticism of the choice of Mr. Sahar Ali to the policing and domestic safety brief within the party. Mr. Ali has faced a number of allegations of transphobia from the party members after being accused of adopting a definition of women that is trans exclusionary. Sian Berry, who is a member of the London Assembly, has long been considered an advocate for trans rights and trans-inclusive feminism. She said she was proud of the progress the party had made in recent years after the Greens racked up gains at the English local elections in May, but said, "My conscience simply cannot agree with the argument that there is anything positive in sending these mixed messages, especially when the inclusive attitudes of our membership and wider society are clear. Failing to win the confidence of a majority of my colleagues to reflect these is also a failure of my leadership." The English and Welsh Greens leader will stand down in November and has urged members to ask themselves important questions about the values their party upholds at this pivotal moment. This is something which affects not only the Green Party, but of course the SNP, Labour and many others over the past year or two, isn't it?
Yes, it affects everybody, I think. I mean, not just people in political parties, not just governments in power.
It affects human rights.
Yes, exactly. It's a hugely important topic. I must admit, I wasn't very familiar with the leadership of the English and Welsh Green parties, but it does sound as if Sian Berry is quite a principled individual, somebody who is willing to do the right thing as she sees fit. I'm sure she'll continue to do what's right, and if I'm right in understanding, I mean, perhaps even it's been quite a clever move by her, because am I right in thinking that in the Green parties, the way they're structured and organised, the co-leaders, they do not rule the party the way that, say, Boris Johnson rules the Tory party, or Nicola Sturgeon rules the SNP party.
Yes, that's how it's supposed to be, yeah.
Yes, it's completely democratic, and they're just figureheads. The leaders are figureheads.
Well, they do provide political leadership.
Of course,
but it's not in the same way.
Yeah, of course, yeah. But it's the members who decide on the policy. But the fact that she's made this statement or this gesture by stepping down from the leadership, I'm sure she's going to continue to be a member, and so it's almost as if she's showing solidarity with the members, making a statement against what she considers to be trans exclusionary or an infringement of trans rights. So it doesn't seem, and they did so well, as you said, in the recent elections, that it sounds like maybe this is not a disaster by any means, and should even maybe come to some kind of not a happy ending. That's ridiculous, but you understand it's like a better situation, a better outcome.
Yeah. Is there a difference then, do you think, between the English and Welsh Greens on this, and perhaps many other issues too, and the Scottish Greens, who of course it worked the other way around? Someone who was prominently anti-trans left the party and was sort of pushed out, as they claimed, from the party because of their anti-trans views, whereas in England it's been the other way around. The person who has been pro-trans inclusivity has been the person who has had to quit. Does that show that there's a bit of a difference between the two parties?
Perhaps I really don't know enough about, as I said, about the English and Welsh Green Party to be able to answer that definitively. But it would seem so, and yet I would say that perhaps that difference between the party in Scotland and the party in England and Wales is probably not as great as I would say maybe the difference between Scottish Labour or the Scottish Tories and their counterparts in down south. Again, I don't want to get off topic, but recently Tory MPs, Scottish Tory MPs in Westminster, who were seen to support recent Tory government policies, which have now been reversed, manifesto pledges, we just spoke about them earlier. So they said that this was a good thing that the Tories made this a manifesto pledge, and now they've been trashed. And so, and those Scottish Tory MPs, if I'm right in thinking, they voted with the Tory government. And so I'm tying myself in knots here and I'm kind of contradicting my argument. But I think that there's probably bigger problems for Scottish Labour when you look at the difference between things like Trident and the like, and when you look
at the position on that. Yeah, absolutely. International news then. Lego cease and desist notice has halted the sales of a Block 19 gun. Marketing the Block 19 as a childhood dream come to life, the company, whom we will not name here on Broadcasting Scotland, said we wanted the Second Amendment to simply be too painful to tread on. So there was only one logical solution. The red, blue and yellow bricks which obscured the original weapon were sold for between $549 and $765. The company enticed adult gun users to buy the gun, advertising it as a childhood dream and made out of the Legos you got from Santa. At the urging of gun control activists, Lego sent the company a cease and desist letter demanding it stop production of the firearm. According to a report from the non-profit Everytown for Gun Safety, the period from March to December 2020 saw a 31% increase in unintentional shooting deaths by children of themselves or others compared with the same period in 2019. Gun ownership reached record highs in the US during the pandemic, with millions of children having had to stay at home. Last week, a 12-year-old in California died after he accidentally shot himself with a gun his friend had brought over for a sleepover. A spokesperson from the gun company claimed that people have the right to customize their property to make it look like whatever they want, and refused to apologize for the creation of the customized weapon. This is a story that makes me quite sick as someone who has a 4-year-old son, just turned 4 2 days ago. Happy birthday, Rory. But this is something that, he would see that in a shop and say, I want that.
It beggars belief. I wasn't aware of this story until we've discussed this earlier on, and it's simply incredible. Why anybody would think that this would be a good idea to put a product like that on the market. It's staggering, simply staggering. For a real gun to look like a toy, I mean, it's bad enough that toys used to look like guns. I know
but they don't anymore.
That's frowned upon now, yes, and rightly so. So it's almost I'm struggling now because I just cannot believe it. And then using like stupid. I mean, I played with Lego as a boy. I don't think I ever made anything that was shaped like a gun out of it. That was the last thing that I would have thought as a child to make out of Lego. And then the other thing that I think is often in the figures that you quoted that's easy to miss, that 31% increase in shootings in America, those were unintentional.
Yes.
This is not somebody who, with malice aforethought, bought a gun, put the ammunition in it, and set off with the intention to kill people and shoot civilians or whoever, or even somebody that they had who was a problem with. This is just, there's a gun in the house, someone stumbles across it, and before you know it, there's a fatality. And so it just shows that the guns really just need to be much more strictly controlled in America than they are just now.
Do you think a story like this highlights that perhaps they are very far away in America from enacting strong gun controls, like you mentioned.
It would seem so, and I remember a programme, Broadcasting Scotland programme, which was on the anniversary of the Lockerbie shooting, and it seemed clear from watching that show that there is a huge difference between Britain and America, but it doesn't look like there's going to be any change in the States anytime soon.
Yeah, and I mean, as soon as there was a mass shooting in a school, of course, in Dunblane, in the 90s.
I said Lockerbie, didn't I? I'm so sorry. Yes, I'm so sorry.
Dunblane. But as soon as that happened, handguns were banned. You know, so it was surprising.
It was the obvious thing to do. You know, it was the right thing to do.
Moving on then. Singapore has unveiled one of the world's biggest floating solar panel farms. Scientists in Singapore have installed a complex of floating solar panels the size of 45 football fields, which will be primarily used to power the state's 5 separate water treatment systems. The project is part of efforts by the land-scarce nation to meet a goal of quadrupling its solar energy production by 2025 to help tackle climate change. The solar farm could help to reduce carbon emissions by about 32 kilotons annually, which is equivalent to taking around 7,000 cars off of the roads. As opposed to conventional rooftop solar panels, floating ones perform between 5 to 15% better, thanks to the cooling effect of the water, and are not impacted by shading from other buildings, according to a presentation on the project. 122,000 solar panels will make up the offshore site, which is projected to last for 25 years and is to be serviced by drones. To allay concerns about the environmental impact of such projects, Singapore's National Water Agency said that an assessment was conducted before installing the solar panels to ensure that there was no significant impact on wildlife or to water quality. Jen Tan, regional head of Sembcorp Industries, who were in charge of the project, said it was carefully designed to improve airflow and allow sunlight passing through the water to reach aquatic life. The site is one of 5 such floating solar panel installations currently underway in Singapore. Singapore is taking big steps now to combat the climate crisis. So are Scotland, are we not?
Yes, I believe so. If the figures are correct, and I've no reason to doubt them, then Scotland has 26% of the UK's renewable energy sources, which is wind and wave mostly, but also solar. We have 90% of the UK's hydro electric power resources. We're working on tidal.
Yep.
That's experimental at the moment, but as people who used to, when they said there was no global warming and the problem with renewable energy was, what are you going to do if you're relying on wind power when there's no wind, or what are you going to do if you rely on solar energy when there's no sun? Well, with tidal, the tide waves are there day in, day out, over, and they just don't go away, they don't stop, regardless of what time of day it is, what time of year it is, what the weather conditions are. So tidal is constant, and if we've got all 3 of those, then we should be fine here in Scotland. As to going back to the situation in Singapore, I love this story. Reading about it, finding out about it, it was like being it's like a science fiction movie. It's like the Welcome to the Future, and I just couldn't help thinking about all of those dystopian. I mean, it's an incredible. I'm all for the project, but in case I sound that I'm not, it sounds as if they've thought about everything. There's land is scarce at a premium because of the population in Singapore, so that somebody's had the bright idea of like, well, why don't we not do it on the land or on buildings, let's do it on the surface of reservoirs. And some said, yeah, but what about blocking out the light and the beasties that live in the reservoirs? Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, we'll make sure they get light. So it's as if they've thought of absolutely everything, but even the names of the companies, they sounded like the names of those kinds of companies in dystopian science fiction movies, and I just hope that this doesn't turn out to be like a science fiction movie where there's some plan for world domination by some evil.
Well, just to put it into context, then you mentioned the wind farms. 60 megawatts is how much energy. It is thought to produce this one in Singapore, the offshore solar panels. The Whiteley's wind farms in Kilmarnock can produce up to 539 megawatts, which can heat and power 310,000 homes, I think it is, around about that. That's quite a long way, isn't it, that Scotland have come in the past few years in terms of our renewable energies.
Sure, and it's not going to be easy. I mean, we're just talking about sources of renewable energy, you know, but with Scotland and 19th century tenement buildings that so many people live in, I think they're going to have to. There are projects though where people are looking at how can they be refurbished and updated to make them so that we can keep that distinctive architecture, that's that very Scottish stone built feeling that we have to our cities, and yet they won't be so drafty and they won't cost so much, which again would help energy poverty and reduce energy poverty and the like. There was something that you said that I was going to hark back to there, and it's just dropped right out of the.
I'm sure we'll pick it up on another programme soon.
Okay.
And finally then, the Scottish Government have removed music tuition and core curriculum fees. Fees for children learning a musical instrument at school will be removed thanks to more than £7 million of funding from the Scottish Government. Councils will also receive £6 million to waive core curriculum charges, which can be levied on families for things including materials for home economics or theatre trips associated with drama qualifications. The agreement with COSLA covers the 2021 to 2022 academic year and marks the delivery of 2 further commitments for the first 100 days of this government. Education Secretary Shirley Ann Somerville said, "My priority is to ensure the best possible outcomes for all of Scotland's children and young people, whatever their background. All children should have the best start in life, and the ability to take part in core elements of education should never be limited to a child's ability to pay." So this is something that when I was in school, I got free music tuition. We were able to learn instruments. It was then subsequently taken away in the following years. And of course, in the SNP manifesto, they promised to bring it back. That's a good thing, right?
Yes, another good news story. It may not seem like a lot, you know, the fact that, you know, kids get to play a musical instrument or get to go to, well, we used to go to.
It transforms life.
It's huge. It's huge. Yes, it's small and simple, but incredibly effective. Again, just contrasting the SNP government with the Westminster government. The SNP government, again, just continues to meet manifesto pledges when the Tory government continues to break manifesto pledges. This isn't even going to be very expensive compared to some things, and so the benefits, I'm sure, for the input, the costs are going to be huge. In my day, we used to all get a coach trip to. It was always Butlins, really, you know. But I'm sure nowadays teachers are more imaginative. What can I say? It's ideal.
Absolutely, and I mean, I wouldn't be doing any of the things that I have done in my life without access to the arts when I was young. So I think it's an absolutely fantastic thing. Okay, well, that pretty much rounds up our programming for this evening. Thank you very much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the discussions and the news headlines that we had today. We can only do what we do here at Broadcasting Scotland thanks to your generous contributions and your support. So if you can, please consider contributing to our crowdfunders or signing up on the website. Thank you very much and good night.